So instead of making a lot of progress on my expert project, I got very sidetracked and decided to work on something that I knew would take some time, but I decided I just had to do it. So that is around this select dropdown. So here is a pure HTML select and options dropdown, and you're probably just familiar with what this looks like. But a lot of what I'll say is high polish applications do not use this select. And I told myself I should just use it and get an MVP out, but I couldn't live with it. So let me share an example of what a polished dropdown looks like, and then I'll talk about some of the options I went through and how I actually decided to implement mine. So I'm gonna go into Stripe. So this is my Stripe dashboard. As you can tell, I made $0 today. That's okay. But I wanted to share with you what this interaction looks like. So here's a drop down in Stripe that I click, and a lot happened, and I want to talk through exactly what happened. So I'll actually zoom in quite a bit. So let's start from just hovering. When I drag my mouse over, you may not be able to see in the recording, but I'll do it a couple times. But you'll notice the drop shadow gets a little more dense on hover. And it also doesn't happen immediately. It's a slight transition. If I had to guess, it's like 100 milliseconds. And in addition, when I click the drop down, it kind of resets the size. Let me just do it one more time. You'll notice that it doesn't just pop right in. It does a couple things. When I click it, you'll notice it goes from invisible to visible, and it basically gets a little bigger and pops out. And in addition, each item as I'm hovering will have a hover state. So that's a lot of beautiful interactions. So let's see how we can actually figure out what they are. I generally just use the inspector tool to figure out exactly what's going on. So first I will actually expand it, and then I'll go to inspect. And it may take a little bit of digging to figure out exactly what item has the animations, but I can see that this div, you can basically start from the top and work your way down, but I see that they have a div that has basically animate in its class name, so I'm gonna guess it's there. And lo and behold, it's here. Let me see if I can zoom in here. And you'll notice that because it's crossed out, I know that this was likely the original state. So it starts with opacity 0, meaning that it's invisible, and it starts at scale 85, meaning it's at 85% of the total size. And then if I pop up here, it goes up to full opacity, so basically visible, and then the full actual size itself, scale 1. And the transition, you can actually see the full definition, but it has its time, so it happens in within a quarter of a second. And the cubic Bezier, this is just an easing function. It just doesn't make it totally linear. It makes it slightly kind of like eases in and eases out. So that is how you can see what animations another area is using. And then if I was interested in learning more, I'd actually want to see like what are the hover states, and for example, what is the transition speed of this little box shadow. So yeah, I mean, a lot goes into making even just a simple drop down. And you might have just seen a bunch of other things. Like you'll see there's an active state here where this blue is a different color than the normal blue in select. So you actually get all of that for free when you use the HTML select. We have this interaction where it actually works. You get this blue focus that I actually don't like. But what's important is that a lot of the click events are already handled. If I click away, it works as expected. If I click even just this element again, it'll go away. So if you decide to make your own dropdown, you're gonna have to consider all of these interactions. So I decided to make my own, and here is what it looks like now. It's not done, but it does have the interactions. If I click away, it works as expected. The click handlers aren't quite working, but you can see that it's not the normal select, and it has some interactions, hovers, like here's hover, and it's slowly getting to a place that I like it. So yeah, let's talk about what that implementation actually looks like. A couple things one thing I just want to express is I'm going to try to explain this in a way that anyone can understand it, not just developers. So if it's a little slow, I apologize, but I'm going to try my best. So let's start with the HTML example. All you have to do is create a select tag and the options you want under your dropdown. And then you get all these interactions for free. You get, well, I'll do a more complicated one. You get this scrolling behavior for free. You basically get all this styling for free. You get all these click handlers for free. Anywhere you click, it removes it. So that all just is baked in. And if you decide not to use select an option, you're gonna have to do it yourself. So let me talk about the implementation I used. I'm pretty sure I copied this from an existing example in W3 schools and just tweaked it to my needs. So I have this high level div where it's just called dropdown, and on click of the dropdown, I have a open increments dropdown function. I'll go into that in a second. And then I have this div called dropdown content, and right now they're just A tags because I'm using it from an example, but all these A tags exist under this div with dropdown content. And dropdown content, here are my styles. Dropdown content starts, let me just make sure that's the case, with display none. So that's why it doesn't appear. However, when you click open increments dropdown, let's see what happens. I just set state for a different reason, but let's ignore that for now. But that whatever was called dropdown content also has an ID, so I could just easily select it. But it toggles the class show, which if we look at show, is just display block, which means it's going from display none to display block, so it's visible. In addition, when I open the dropdown, I've created an event listener for click, and it calls close dropdown. This is where it gets a little weird, but one, I'm dealing with state for a different reason, but I'll get to that later. But what it does is it looks for where you click, and if you click on anything that's not the dropdown, it won't. It will go through every single item in the DOM that has dropdown content and basically remove the class show. So that means that it'll go back to hide. So you just want to make sure this works. This is the behavior where if I click away, it works as expected. Even if I click this item here, it works as expected. And then you'll have to deal with your own handling of how these items are clicked. So that's the high-level implementation. Let's see if there's anything else I want to go through. So one thing you'll notice is that I copied 30, 60 minutes several times. And the reason I did that was just to make sure my scroll capability works. Because you've created this yourself, you have complete control over this div. Like, do you want to show the scroll bar at all times? What height do you want this to be as far as a max height? So I've set that here. So I have a max height of 200 and it scrolls. And then I can add as many more interactions as I want. So I can make it scroll more, I can make it longer, or if I don't even want it to scroll and I want to change the height, it's all up to me. If I want the scroll bar to show at all times, you get to decide. So that's sort of, that's a high level of the interaction design of a dropdown and why you'd want to create it. And I personally just want to create my own because it just looks a lot better, and I think high quality apps generally make their own. You get a lot for free using these, and if you are making a simple MVP, you can always consider doing that. But you just, that extra polish comes from making it yourself. And that's it. Let me know if you guys have any questions.